Welcome back to Everything LA Real Estate. I'm your host, Mike Babakani of Martin Mike Properties. If you are a landlord in Los Angeles, or if you're thinking about becoming a landlord, this is definitely a must-watch episode for you folks. I have a special guest, Raymond Hovsepian, attorney at law. Raymond, welcome back.
Nice to be back.
Absolutely. This is part 2. So if you didn't see our first episode, the video will be in the description. So Raymond, briefly for the viewers who haven't watched our first episode, tell them about yourself.
Well, my name is Raymond Hovsepian. I'm an attorney primarily specializing in landlord-tenant law, and I've been doing this for a little over 29 years. I represent landlords and tenants, but lately mostly landlords. Commercial landlords, residential landlords, obviously, and I do consulting work for landlords who are about to become landlords or are thinking about additional properties they're going to purchase. So I consult with them for that purpose as well.
Very good, very good. Well, I have a lot of great questions. I know things may be changing in the coming months, so let's start off with Costa-Hawkins Act. For the viewers who do not know what that is, it was established in 1995. Tell them briefly, what is Costa-Hawkins Act?
Well, Costa-Hawkins Act is a state law, California state law, that primarily limits the power of certain local jurisdictions regarding properties such as single-family homes, condos, townhouses, properties that were built after February 1, 1995. Those properties, the local jurisdictions cannot make a rent control type of property. So the Costa-Hawkins Act limits local jurisdictions such as LA County or any county in California or any city in California.
Very good. And the reason why I wanted to start off with Costa-Hawkins Act was because in the coming months, Prop 33 is in the ballot, and we're going to be voting on that, which I'm definitely against it. What's your take on Prop 33? Tell the viewers what it is, and what do you think?
Well, Prop 33 would eliminate Costa-Hawkins Act.
Correct.
This is not the first attempt at trying to eliminate it. It's happened twice before, and both times they failed in the proposition level. But it's back, and it's going to be on the ballot in November.
Correct.
And if Prop 33 is passed, then a lot of the protections under Costa-Hawkins Act would be eliminated.
Correct.
And local jurisdictions such as City of Glendale, City of Los Angeles, or County of Los Angeles, they would be freer to develop their own plans regarding what landlords' rights are, what tenants' rights are. So in a lot of ways, that would limit landlords' rights locally if Prop 33 is passed. So if you don't want the protections, if you don't want the protections to end of certain kinds of properties, then you vote no on Prop 33.
Correct. So if Prop 33 passes, basically single-family homes, condos, and townhouses will fall under rent control.
Well, not automatically, but the cities would have the jurisdiction to do that.
Which,
Well, yeah, most of the time cities and counties are going towards limiting landlord rights. That's been happening, especially in the last 4 or 5 years. So we're seeing a greater amount of power being flexed by local jurisdiction over landlord rights.
Just imagine single-family homes in LA County will be under rent control. I think it's a terrible idea. I know they're trying to help tenants, but at the end of the day, I feel like if this passes, supply and demand, builders will go out of state. They'll put their money somewhere else, and it's going to hurt inventory even more. Don't you think so?
Well, I think that a lot of studies suggest that developers would stop wanting to build new units because of the unprofitability of building if they're limited. So, of course, limits are not good for developers, they're not good for landlords. And now that we need a greater stock of housing out there, that might inadvertently drive up the cost of housing even more.
True, very true. So Raymond, let's switch gears. I'm going to act and pretend I'm a landlord. A lot of questions my clients ask me, and I'm sure a lot of viewers have these questions. So I'm just gonna, no particular order, I'm gonna ask you some questions and just tell me what you think, okay?
Sure.
Let's talk about security deposit. I've had clients say, Mike, I want 2 months security deposit, they have bad credit. What's the law?
Well, the new law is that security deposit can be only 1 month's rent.
Correct.
So whether the house is furnished or unfurnished, it used to be you could ask for more security deposit, 3 months, in fact, if it was furnished, and unfurnished was 2 months. So there are limitations as to the amount of security deposit that you can have or you can ask for as a landlord. So we're limited as to only 1 month.
1 month. What about advance rent? Could they ask for, say, the tenant has bad credit, could they ask for 3 months rent?
I don't know of any limitations on the landlord asking for rent up front, as long as they're credited as they go. In other words, if you're asking for 3 months up front, you can't ask on the second month, pay me rent now. So you have to give them credit for those 3 months.
Okay. Is there any particular law about pet deposits? Like what's the maximum pet deposit?
Well, pet deposits are, they have to be limited so that you are not discriminating, because if you have a service animal or something like that, then that could be considered discrimination. But if it's a pet, you can ask for a deposit for sure.
How much?
Well, it depends. It depends on the rent.
Okay.
So the amount of rent, there's no hard and fast rule on that. But I would say like a 10% deposit is not unreasonable.
Okay. Usually we ask for $1,000 deposit for pets.
Depends on how large the property is. The larger the property, of course, you can ask for more pet deposit because more can be damaged.
Correct.
So it has to be something that is reasonable, taking into account the amount of rent.
So Raymond, some landlords are curious about the benefits and challenges of accepting a tenant with Section 8. I'm just curious, what's your take on it?
First of all, I have to say that all landlords should be aware that they cannot discriminate against a tenant who is a Section 8 tenant.
Okay.
In other words, as a landlord, you cannot have a blanket policy against Section 8 tenants. That's against the law. That's discrimination. And I have heard from some landlords who have fallen into a trap where they tell a tenant, we do not accept Section 8 tenants. They do it in writing, and then later on they're sued for discrimination. So you have to be careful as a landlord that you are not discriminating based on source of income, such as Section 8.
Sure.
So you need to, as a landlord, be careful. You have to require that all tenants fill out an application. So don't say yes or no over the phone or by text or anything like that. Have them fill out an application and review the application. Make sure you don't run afoul of any of the anti-discrimination laws. In terms of Section 8, whether that's a good idea or not, Section 8 provides landlords with a definite, continuing, frequent income. So you know that it's not going to stop. Even during the pandemic, it didn't stop. Section 8 landlords were continuing to get paid. So they were happy about that. So Section 8 is a good program because it helps a lot of people. Some landlords love it because of the fact that rent is received frequently.
Guaranteed, yeah.
Guaranteed income. The negatives, I don't know what the negatives, it's on a case-by-case basis. There is more scrutiny over a property. Rent could be abated or taken down a notch if you do not make sure that it's kept up.
Correct.
So the property has to be kept up to make sure that it continues to generate income.
Great answer. How would one deal with problematic tenants? If a landlord has a tenant, for example, no pets, and then all of a sudden 6 months later they got a pet without the landlord's consent. What could a landlord do?
Yes. So I think some homework needs to be done prior to entering into an agreement. Before you give the key to a tenant, you have to make sure that you vet your tenant properly. Background checks, make sure that they don't have negative scores or negative credit or negative lawsuits against them. So you want to make sure that you do your homework in advance. You want to also make sure that you address the issue right away with the tenant. I have had a lot of landlords who are absentee. They never talk to their tenant. They don't address their concerns, and then it snowballs into a bigger and a bigger problem. You have to address as a landlord all the issues that a tenant may have. You have to be there for their concerns. So those are some of the things that I would say are what landlords can do to better prepare themselves. And then finally, the landlords have to make sure that they need to be trusting but verify. So in other words, they need to make sure that the contracts, the leases are done correctly. They are done with scrutiny, and there is to make sure that all the rents that the tenant pays to get in are certified funds, cashier checks, no personal checks, obviously. So those are some of the things that I would say right off the bat comes to my mind about being a good landlord.
What if, for example, in the lease, the landlord said no pets, and then 6 months later, the landlord finds out, hey, my tenant has a pet. I never gave him the okay. What can the landlord do?
Well, the landlord
without discriminating, I guess.
Well, what the landlord can do is have a dialogue with the tenant first, saying, "Hey, I noticed you have a pet there, and there's a no pet clause in your lease," and then see what the tenant says. If the tenant says, "Well, I don't care. This is an emotional support animal," well, that's not enough. It has to be a service animal. So what you have to do is you have to let the tenant know that what they're doing is a violation, and that if that doesn't get anywhere, then start eviction action.
Or could you ask for pet deposit at that point?
Yes, you could modify. If both parties agree to modify the lease, they can.
Okay.
So you do an addendum to the lease, and you allow the pet to be there. I would say make sure you put the description of the pet. So the pet that you see now, a little Chihuahua, doesn't become a Great Dane later. So you need to describe the animal.
That's a good point. Well, what about family members? Because I've seen it happen where, the lease is done, 3 months later, a family member is visiting, but they're 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and now it's a couple months. What could a landlord do to protect themselves in that case? Could they evict the tenant?
Yeah, they can. The landlord must have, first of all, good neighbors, because now if there's an apartment building, and this is happening in an apartment building where there are other tenants, you have to have a good friend tenant who can witness the person who's coming and going all the time for at least, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks. Now, you could have a visitor for maybe 2 weeks, but if you're seeing that the person is parking their car and coming upstairs and then they're leaving the next morning, and this has been happening for, let's say, a month, you're safe to assume that this is an extra occupant who is not authorized to live there.
Correct.
So you have to have good friend tenants, other tenants, or neighbors who can come to court if needed and testify as to this, because at the end of the day, the landlord's burden is to prove that there's an extra occupant. And the best way to prove is obviously witnesses, photos, those kinds of things. So yes, you can evict if there's an extra occupant.
Could you increase rent?
You can increase rent as well. Now, there's certain City of Los Angeles rent control laws that do not allow you to raise rent under certain circumstances.
Okay.
So, for example, let's say this is what the Housing Department of City of Los Angeles says. For example, if you allow 2 people and one person moves out and another person moves in, you can't evict that there's an extra occupant or a different occupant. You can ask for verification of who this other person is, but you can't just jump to, oh, I want to evict because A and B were living there, B moved out, and C moved in. So the number of people is an issue. Now, the one thing that you have to understand in the City of Los Angeles, if you had knowledge that there's somebody who's living there who's not authorized, and you let it go for past, let's say, a couple of months, you may be on the hook with that person being your tenant, whether you like it or not. So you have to keep your eyes and ears open. The laws are there not to protect landlords. Those laws are there to protect tenants.
Let's switch gears to property maintenance, okay? What repairs and upkeep is a landlord legally required to do?
Well, the upkeep has to be in the areas of health and safety for
Okay.
the most part.
Okay.
You have to make sure you have a safe unit for the tenant. You're maintaining a healthy unit
Correct.
for the tenant.
No mold, none of that.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. So aesthetics is not part of the equation. If something doesn't look nice, that doesn't that's not an obligation of the landlord. Now, sometimes tenants say, "Hey, I'll make it nicer. I'll put up brand new cabinets. I'll paint. I'll do this. I'll do that." You have to make sure that those things are done the right way. So, first of all, a tenant needs written authorization from a landlord in every instance. Even if they're making the place look beautiful, they need written authorization. So, a lot of landlords say, "I didn't know they were going to do this. They were going to put up brand new cabinets, etc." You know, that's because it was done in an unauthorized manner. So, you have to make sure that there's screens on the windows. They're not torn. Windows are operable. Doors are operable. Security is intact to make sure that the walls are even. You don't have peeling paint. You don't have ceiling that's leaking. You don't have plumbing that's leaking. There are a variety of things.
Heating sources.
The heating sources, now cooling even, air conditioning is becoming a new thing. So
Speaking of air conditioning, so I had a particular case where my client's tenant contacted him and said, "Hey, the AC is not working properly." So he sent out a technician, and the technician said they have the thermostat on 62. The unit cannot cool down to 62.
Yes.
So the tenant was like, "I need the landlord to change it." The landlord said, "Why would I change it? It's 62. That's not normal. Usually people put 68, 69. So landlord legally could refuse to change the AC unit at that point. Can't
yes, yes. So again, everything has to be reasonable.
Reasonable,
So
exactly.
now with the energy crisis, going into the hot months, we were in the hot months a couple of weeks ago. We have to make sure that the thermostat is set at a temperature where the grid is not overloaded, et cetera, et cetera. So again, it's what is reasonable.
Correct.
And if what the landlord is doing is reasonable, that's enough.
Okay. Well, what if the tenant used certain products, they flush down the toilet, and it causes a blockage, and now the landlord has extra expense to get that fixed? Could they ask the tenant to pay for it, or go after them for damages?
Yes, they can. If there's corroboration from a plumber who would be acting as a witness of the landlord, and negligence has been perpetrated by a tenant, the landlord can either deduct from the security deposit or take them to small claims court and ask for damages. Now, if the damages are of such nature that is, maybe the whole place flooded, there could even be an eviction action for waste or some sort of a breach of contract on the part of the tenant. So that is certainly an option for a landlord to take.
Okay. Here's another example. Let's say it's a 40-unit building. On the second floor, one of the tenants is not taking care of the property the right way. There's cockroaches because of their lifestyle. And now because of that, the cockroaches are going to the other units. Could the landlord evict that tenant?
Yes.
Legally.
Yes. Again, this we see a lot of bed bug situation because bed bugs do travel from unit to unit.
Correct.
So we've had some tenants who call our landlord clients and say, "I have a bed bug issue. I think my neighbor brought in a sofa off the street or something, and there's bed bugs, and I'm suffering from it." So a good pest control company with a good reputation would go in, and they could conclude that the bed bugs are coming from the furniture of the tenant.
Got it.
And then that tenant could be evicted based on maintaining a nuisance in the complex.
Got it. And if they do evict that tenant, then at that point, could the landlord put the rent market value?
For now, yes.
For now.
So again, Prop 33,
Vote
going
no.
back, yes. So Prop 33 may allow cities, local municipalities to enact certain laws that might even take away decontrolling upon vacancy. In other words, if the property becomes vacant and another tenant comes in, that other tenant would have the same rent as a tenant who moved out. So that's gonna, I think, negatively impact. I'll leave it up to you to determine how much that would negatively impact the value of properties in California.
It will definitely hurt the value. Raymond, what could a landlord do if other tenants are complaining about a specific tenant that's causing, they're disturbing the peace, basically?
Yeah.
What are the action steps the landlord could take?
Yeah. I tell a lot of my landlords that they don't have to become all of a sudden kindergarten teachers, because I see that there is a disagreement or fight or some internal thing between neighbors, and one neighbor calls the landlord and says, hey, you got to get rid of this tenant, and I'm having problems because, for example, they're too noisy, and leave the door open. Okay, this is a true story. And the landlord says, I cannot tell people, a tenant of mine, to keep the door closed. That's just their right to have the door open, and they're loud people. I cannot tell them not to be loud because you're too sensitive, et cetera, et cetera. So landlords have to know what their limits are. Okay? They cannot all of a sudden become referees or, like I said, kindergarten teachers because there's a fight between some tenants, And unfortunately, they get sucked into this kind of a conflict.
True.
But it's limited what landlords can do. If somebody's breaking the law, if they are a nuisance, I had a client who told me, I think they're growing marijuana. Okay, something like that, yes. But, so-and-so, their children above me are, let's say, too loud. The children walk around and I can't sleep. Well, I tell a landlord, you cannot evict a person because their child was noisy, because then it becomes a discrimination lawsuit against you because you're discriminating against a family with children. So these are kinds of things that there's no hard and fast rule. You just sort of when you see it, you know it, whether there's something there or not.
Got it. Let's discuss tenant relocation fees. Okay, at fault, no fault. Talk to me about that.
Well, relocation fees are the kinds of remunerations that are given to a tenant based on a no fault, but with a reason. In other words, there's cause to ask the tenant to leave, but the tenant is not at fault. Okay? For example, I want to move my mother in. I want to move my child in. I want to move my grandparent in. And each jurisdiction has its own set of laws regarding relocation, regarding the amount, how you can do it, when you can do it, how often you can do it, is a tenant protected or not. There are a whole host of laws that are like, it's like a patchwork of laws. So one property could have a certain kind of law pertaining to it as it comes to relocation. Next door to it could have a complete different one based on when that other property was built or what the characteristic of that other property is. So you would have to almost talk to a professional, an attorney who is in this area of the law, to tell you what you can or cannot do, because there are so many variables and there's so many different pitfalls that a landlord can fall into that you have to make sure that you dot your I's and cross your T's, because it's very important.
So, for example, I'm thinking about selling a property. I have a tenant in there, they're on a month-to-month lease. Can I give him a 6-day notice and ask them to vacate without paying them, or will I be obligated to pay them?
Good question without a good answer.
It depends.
It depends. Everything depends nowadays. Everything depends. So sale of property is never a reason that you can evict on. Sale of property is just not one of those. So you have to find a different way of evicting a tenant.
So you're saying I can't evict them at all? I want to sell the
Not
property.
based on the sale of property. In other words, sale of property is never reason that, you need to leave because I'm selling the property.
But I could pay the money to relocate
Well,
them,
you can pay if they're volunteering to take it, like a cash for keys.
Okay.
So cash for keys is a voluntary contract between landlord and tenant, where a contract is drawn up and the landlord has certain obligations and responsibilities and the tenant as well, and they have this contract. Sometimes that contract has to be communicated to the city, like in Los Angeles. So you have to make sure that you know what you can or cannot do. Certain properties in state of California, even in LA County, you don't have to give the tenant any reason to evict them. You don't have to say, I'm selling the property. You just tell them, I want you gone. Here's a 30-day notice. Here's a 60-day notice. Here's a 90-day notice, whatever the case might be. Now, there are protections. So each kind of property, each kind of jurisdiction has its own set of laws that a landlord needs to follow and abide by.
I recently did a cash for keys for a tenant that's living in one of the bedrooms. The seller lives there, occupies the property, but he rented one of the bedrooms to a tenant, and he was there for 4 years, 5 years, and he wouldn't move out. And obviously the buyer's not going to close escrow, so we negotiated cash for keys, and now he's moving out end of this month.
I think that's a great thing to do. Cash for keys gives landlords what they want, and it gives tenants what they want. Correct. I think it's a good give and take between a landlord and tenant. So cash for keys are definitely something to explore.
What about ADUs? Everyone's building ADUs nowadays. Is there any changes, any landlord-tenant rights?
Well, the one trend I'm seeing with ADUs is that ADUs are being built. Obviously, when you build an ADU, it takes away a garage or land from an existing tenant. Maybe an existing tenant had a larger backyard or a garage. And all of a sudden, the ADU is going to be there. So the landlord has to take away the services out of the tenant's hands. Has to say, you can't park in the garage anymore. You have to park outside. I'm going to designate something for you on the property, but in a different place, but outside. And tenants may not like it. So there are certain kinds of laws. City of Glendale has certain laws. City of Los Angeles, obviously, where if you're taking something away, you have to reduce the rent. In other words, if I'm taking a garage out of a tenant's hands, I have to give them a reduction of rent. So I'm seeing that a lot. ADUs, obviously the cities and county, they all want more housing stock.
True.
So in order to encourage that, they're giving permits for these ADUs for minimal parking spots. But then we see the conflict between the existing tenants and the landlord. Now it's a give and take. Oh my God, I won't have this. I won't have my backyard anymore. Where will my kids play? That kind of thing. I'm seeing a lot in the ADU world. And also another thing that people who are building ADUs need to look out for is the fact that usually their property was a single-family home, and now there's another unit that they've built, and that other unit may affect the marketing of the property. It might affect the legality of tenant rights on the property.
Does it become rent control or no?
Yes. So if you had a single-family home, let's say you're in the city of LA, you have a single-family home in the front, built in the 50s, let's say, and then you have a brand new ADU built in 2024. So all of a sudden, the front unit, the older single-family home that was never rent-controlled, now is rent-controlled.
Really?
Because now you have 2 units on the lot, and the single-family home is not a single-family home anymore because it's part of another 2 units on the lot. So that has to be taken into consideration. And all of a sudden, if you have a tenant, or not even a tenant, you have to register the property in the city of LA. You have to register a property that the landlord owns and lives in himself, and then he has to exempt it because it's an owner-occupied unit. So he doesn't pay the fees, but he's still got to register it. So, I have a lot of incredulous looks from landlords who tell me, "Oh my God, I didn't know that. Oh wow, my single-family home is now rent-controlled." Yes, it is.
Unreal. What other common question do you see from landlords nowadays? Since maybe I didn't ask you a question, but the viewers might be thinking about it.
The common questions I see nowadays are actually the most difficult parts of landlord-tenant law, and that's when family wants to evict family. Okay, I'm seeing that where a brother or a child or somebody who's living on a property needs to leave and be evicted, and they're not leaving. And those are the toughest kinds of eviction when family has to evict another family member. So, unfortunately, it's a fact of life. It happens a lot of times in the sale of property where the owner is deceased and a sibling is taking over the property and has to make sure that the property becomes empty so that it could be sold and the proceeds could be divided between the beneficiaries.
Raymond, if the viewers have any questions, because this was fantastic, I really appreciate your time. If they have any questions, they want to reach out to you directly, what's your phone number?
Okay, so my phone number is 323-953-9494. We're located in the Los Feliz area. Almost all of my consultations and meetings with clients are done via Zoom or over the phone. If you'd like to come in, you're more than welcome, but it's not necessary because of the traffic and the very busy lifestyle that we all have.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
As things change, it's LA County, things
Yes.
will always change. We might have part 3. Never know.
Absolutely. I'll be
Pleasure.
here.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Mike.
Talk to you guys later.